Hi there, I'm Moe Carrick. I'm a consultant, an author, and a workplace provocateur. I love helping leaders make their workplaces fit for the human beings that work there. My two books, Fit Matters, How to Love Your Job, and BraveSpace, Workplace, Making Your Company Fit for Human Life, are built around supporting you on your journey to go to work every day loving your job. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of different threads. One is we're really going to look at the myths of how to create an inclusive workforce, and in particular, what that means in terms of loss and what we have to let go of. In particular, we're also going to spend some time thinking about how we actually create connection, why it matters at work, and the ways we do it, even in a virtual environment, which we know is what the future holds. And lastly, I can't wait to talk to Doug a little bit about the 7 needs that we bring to work. They're not what you think. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Are you impatient for the integration of AI? Well, many of those who are chomping at the bit to integrate AI believe it's a cure for the most unpredictable aspect of their business, meaning people. But the answer is not AI, it's people skills. For the last 10 or 15 years, I've been clearly stating that soft skills are the new bottom line. Companies large and small are routinely brought to their knees by so-called soft stuff or people problems. And anyone knows who's tried to use them, well, it can be a little difficult. So what exactly do you need to do to create an environment that will keep your people loyal? And how can we all get much better at those skills? Well, stay tuned because we're going to discover just that. I'm your host, Dov Baron, the Dragonist, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. To find out more about me, you can simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. By the way, this episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by Megcast. Imagine having your own industry magazine. What would that do for your authority? Well, whether you're a coach, a content expert, or an emerging brand, it's hard to stand out from the crowd. So what if there was a proven way to increase both your perceived authority and professional status in the eyes of your market and do it all at once? Well, this is your way to go from being invisible to getting meetings with anyone. To find out more, go to magcast.co. That's MAGCAST.co, where first-time publishers create thriving magazine businesses. All right, remember you can also chat about this show or any past episodes by finding us in your Facebook or LinkedIn. You can just simply go to look for those groups, Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you tune into podcasts. We always need your help in staying relevant, so please get over there, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. Again, I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and let's dive right in. Like I said, if you're impatient for the integration of AI and you think it's going to solve your people problems, you are definitely fooling yourself. There are many catastrophes that you have no control over. They tend to hit out of nowhere and send everyone scrambling. But we're good at adapting, human beings, and we adapt and we change. However, there are major catastrophes that are what you might think of as a cumulative. They happen over a long period of time. And when they create enough cultural weight, it can collapse your organization in the blink of an eye. Companies large and small are, as I said, regularly brought to their knees by these so-called soft skills or people problems. So what does the research show are the 7 things that people need from work, and how can you and I get way better at them? Well, stay tuned because you're about to discover just that. Our guest on this episode is Moe Carrick. Now, Moe wants more workplaces that are where people can work with leaders who actually give a crap about them. She consults, writes, and speaks on the topic very often. She is helping average humans do superhuman things to create connections that matter at work, which helps everyone bring their full selves to work every single day. She's a regular blogger on these topics related to people and work, and she is a contributor to the Conscious Company magazine. Maven House Press released her first book, a bestseller, Fit Matters, How to Love Your Job. That was in 2017, and her most recent book, BraveSpace, is creating workspaces that are fit for human life, was released in 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome author of BraveSpace, Moe Carrick. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So good to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. It took a while, but we're certainly glad to have you here. And where we always like to start our show is by saying that in a world of influencers where everybody can shout out a big name, who is someone that we might not know, we might not even suspect, who has been a major influence on you and on your leadership? Who's someone who's sort of, like I said, maybe even behind the scenes?
Oh, there's so many, Dov, right? That's such a hard question. But I think right now I'm really noticing the influence of actually my father, who's been deceased. His name is Dan Lickauer. He's been deceased for nearly 30 years. But I have been thinking a lot about the influence that he had on me, around how he lived his life and how he showed up in his partnerships. I wrote a little bit about him in the foreword to BraveSpace Workplace, and his courage, his willingness to show up in his own story, owning it fully, has been really inspiring for me. So I would say dear old dad right now.
So is that the impact? Is it showing up in your own story? Is that what it means for you?
It is. You know, my dad was an architect. He was a man who was way ahead of his time. And he had a lot of challenges. My dad was in recovery from alcoholism. He got sober when I was 6. And so I kind of grew up in a spiritual community of Alcoholics Anonymous. And my dad really, once he kind of began to heal himself, showed up in a really authentic way. And I think what I see in leaders, you know, having the privilege of coaching leaders and working with leaders in many different organizations at the C-suite and at the board level, it's often really hard for us all to show up fully. And in times like this, of course, where there's so much ambiguity and turbulence, I think being grounded in our confidence, being able to stand firmly rooted in who we are, makes us really effective if we could do that. And I think my dad was really skilled at that.
That's awesome. Now, the title of the book, BraveSpace Workplace, talk to us a little bit, just first of all. I know it's kind of probably a question you've answered 1,000 times, but just to give everybody context, why did you choose that title? You know?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wanted a title that described what I was trying to help leaders do. You know, I wrote my first book, Fit Matters, How to Love Your Job, with my co-author, Cammie Dunaway, who's now the CMO of Duolingo. And my consulting practice has very much been focused on helping leaders create an environment where they can really activate the full potential of their people, which is not that easy to do necessarily. You know, we're messy as human beings, aren't we? We're not like machines. We're a lot more dynamic and a lot more fragile in a lot of ways. But in searching for a title, I wanted to keep this whole idea of fit, workplace fit for human life has been a piece of language that I really have liked around how are we activating the people part of our business.
Mm-hmm.
And originally I started thinking about the language of a safe space. I'm sure you've heard about the research around social capital, creating psychological safety. Google did a very seminal piece of research in 2015 called the Aristotle Project. And I really spent a lot of time with clients working on how to create that psychological safety. But at the same time, in my work with leaders, I've also come to see that we can't ever really guarantee safety.
No.
And as a facilitator of Brene Brown's work, Dare to Lead, we often talk about how there are no guarantees. So I started playing around with that idea of safe space, social capital. What does it mean if we're actually brave, knowing there are no guarantees? So I sort of landed on BraveSpace. The interesting thing about the title was after we landed on the title of the book, of course, we started researching it and make sure, are there other books by this title? And we discovered that the word was actually already used in the inclusion space, in particular in student personnel environments for college campuses around creating brave spaces, in particular for the trans movement around heteronormativity. And they had kind of already coined that language for the same reason around we can't guarantee safety, but we want our students to feel that they can be brave here. So we thought, all right, we like that word and decided to put it in the title.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I think that there's a very good friend of mine wrote quite a famous book on safe space for the family business world. And, that term is thrown around, but I really, what was enticing to me was the title, which was BraveSpace, because I've never been politically correct, so I'm not going to start right this moment. And the reason I like BraveSpace is because we've become too frickin' fragile. I mean, I think that we're all looking for everybody else to protect us and put cotton buds around us. And this book is asking us to be brave in spite of there not being a safe space, as in a guaranteed safe space, right?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
That's what I think is important.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I think about this language that I use in the definition, which is that a brave space workplace is one where people can show up every day as they are, both perfect and flawed, and do great things together. Because I don't think we actually show up every day perfectly. We show up as best we can, but some days are better than others, And I think an employer who's really trying to activate those hidden talents that their people have has to create that kind of culture and that kind of community. And I love what you said about so much cotton padding, so much political correctness, so much saying the right thing, a lot of anxiety around doing it right, which keeps us from innovation. Sometimes it keeps us from creativity, keeps us from reaching across into different dynamic partnerships. So good. I'm glad you like the word. I like it too.
Well, I think that one of our greatest challenges is, I do get the concept, the premise of political correctness. I think it's destructive in its application because it's become now everybody's scared of saying the wrong thing to the wrong person, as opposed to saying, how would you like me to phrase that works for you? Yes. Which is actually eliciting, right? Because I don't care if you call me man, woman, or budgerigard. I really don't care, right? It's irrelevant to me. But for somebody else, it does matter, and that's fine. Then you can tell them, and you can tell other people. But when we're all like, should I say he, she, they, maybe? Just tell me, what do you want? And so as a result, I mean, you think about our relationships with the people we're closest to, we're not politically correct. And that's important. I think, my closest friends, we say completely politically incorrect things to each other. That's how we know we have a relationship. And so this political correctness is, in my mind, has removed the bravery that is needed to potentially offend enough to say, can we course correct on that? Oh, sure. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Okay, no problem. And so that's why I really liked what you were saying about that, is that is calling us to that.
Yeah. Yeah. This expression I sometimes use comes to mind as you're talking around, like, am I willing to step in dog do? Like, am I willing to do it wrong in order to ... in order
Yep.
to do something we didn't think was possible, in order to give you hard feedback, in order to receive hard feedback? Am I willing to really go there? And I think that's where it does require our courage, and it requires us to be willing to be uncomfortable.
Absolutely. So I said at the beginning that there's a lot of people who are waiting for AI to come and solve all their problems when it comes to people. And you actually start the book off with a great quote from Isaac Asimov about humans and machines. And I thought that was a very interesting place to start. So tell us why you chose to start with an Asimov. By the way, I interviewed one of his co-authors very recently. So, I mean, like, in awe.
Awesome. Yeah.
Because
Wow.
Asimov is
Lucky
godly
you.
in that world. So why did you choose to start a people book, a book about dealing with these fragile human beings with a quote from Isaac Asimov?
Well, can I read the quote?
Please.
Yeah. So the quote, I had to look it up because I was like trying to remember. So it's from Robot Visions. And he says, in a properly automated and educated world, then machines may prove to be the true humanizing influence. It may be that machines will do the work that makes life possible, and that human beings will do all the other things that make life pleasant and worthwhile. I also love Asimov, and I love that quote.
Mm-hmm.
And the quote is the beginning of chapter 2, which is titled AI, Machines and Robots, Oh My. Sort of, tripping along in The Wizard of Oz was my image there, because I think that most leaders today are aware that machination, automation, robotic technology is changing the world of the workforce. I mean, there's not any study that I've seen that's telling us that anything is, that is not going to happen. And it's going to take jobs, right? It already has, and it's going to continue to take jobs as we get better at using machines. But what I've really come to see and experience in my client systems, and also in my own life, is that still leaves a huge amount of work that actually is uniquely human.
Yes.
Machines can do a lot. Automation and AI can do a lot. They can make rote tasks faster. They can crunch ginormous pieces of data that we never imagined. They can alleviate the boredom and monotony for humans of having to sit there and hook up wire A to wire B, which we've done for the past 100 years. But what they can't do yet is create human connection. They can't lead. They can't feel with, which we call empathy. They can't navigate the nuances of the vulnerability of someone in a medical environment hearing bad news. They can't do the things that we as humans can do on an emotional and connection level. They can't do that because they're trained by humans. They're limited in that way around the limbic brain response, the pheromonal response, around all the things that humans do that make us really, really different than machines. And I think, as Asimov says here, what happens if machines and automation and AI take on all that stuff that actually kind of bogs us down a little and leaves us with that stuff that's uniquely human, that we can really, really get good at, even better than we've been at in the past? And I think that's how I think of it, is like we free up this possibility for humanity, but we need to be ready for it, don't we? We can't just be complacent and like feel grief that jobs are being lost and fill them with, machines, without actually retraining our workforce around those things that humans really are best at doing.
But you bring up something there that is a cultural challenge, not just at work, but of humans, and that we don't like change.
Right.
Right. So we don't like change. We don't like change. We do like convenience, but we don't like to get to convenience via change. And that's an interesting dichotomy for human beings. So, for things to change, they have to change, and for things to get easier, things have to change. But the Luddites protested the loom. When people were making a loom, and then the Luddites protested electric light in the streets, and the Luddites protested the internet, and there will always be Luddites of some form who will resist. And that doesn't change the fact that things are going to change. It just slows it down. Because I had this conversation with somebody recently. I lived in the United Kingdom in the 70s during the 4-day work week, 3-day work week, when the miners were on strike because they were closing mines, when the shippers were on strike because they were closing down shipyards, when the steel workers were on strike because the steel work was going away. All those things have gone away. All of those. The country did not fall into the ocean. It reinvented itself, but with a ton of resistance and a lot of disgruntled individuals for a long time. Do you, when you, in your cultural work, how do you assist a leader or leaders in bringing that to toe with people, and so saying, listen, I know it's difficult, but.
Well, it's such an interesting question because you're tapping into kind of two threads there, right? One is the thread of change, how do we resist change? Why do we resist change? And how do we move towards that new future? For me, that's always about grief.
Yes.
It's always about what we have to let go of, the way we used to do it. I started my career, believe it or not, well, you probably would believe it, but I was a training specialist on a billing system. I worked for a company called Moe Cellular, which was prior to, they became Cellular One. They were bought by AT&T, but Moe Cellular was started by Craig McCaw, who was an early innovator in the cell space. Back when phones were still on analog, not digital. Yeah. I'm dating myself here, right? But I think that the dynamic of grief is, what does it mean to let go of the way that it used to be? And when I worked at McCaw, my job, I actually had the really fun, you'll get a kick out of this stuff. I had the singular pleasure of being one of the few people that implemented a computer program that was based on the computer system that Steve Jobs designed when he was in between his Apple gigs. So he founded Next Computing, right? These big black boxes. Yeah. And Next computers were implemented in one company. It was Moe Cellular, and I was the trader on that billing system. And that was really powerful time because we were trying to train people how to use the system differently. It was a very different UI interface. And what I noticed, of course, like most computer, systems, people went through a parallel process. And as happens often, people get the new technology on board, but they continue to use the old to make sure that it all works. And then when the old is finally ripped from them, they use sticky notes or their notebook or whatever to keep their old way of doing it. And it's about, what will I lose? Will I lose my competence? Will I lose my sense of being able to do a good job? Will I lose efficiency? And so I think we have to deal with that as we think about this dynamic of the changes facing the workforce. So grief for me comes first. The other thing that comes up for me is that in the arena we're talking about, Dove, around human connection, around optimizing our workforce in terms of the employee experience. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, turning people on so they come to work every day at, like, on a 10 scale, an 8 or a 9, not like a 2 or a 3 where they're just taking up space. To do that as a leader, I have to really know who I am. I have to really do some work about my motivations, my drive, my desire, my capacity to have empathy, to see and feel my employees. And I think a lot of leaders arrive at leadership not having done some of that personal work. They get promoted because they're good at their job, and then they land there and they say, holy heck, how do I do this? And so I end up spending a lot of time with leaders on that personal journey of what's my part in the story of activating the potential of the people around me and the processes around me. Because to do that, I have to be extremely self-aware. I have to be willing to be self-compassionate. And so, it sounds a bit woo-woo, but it's pretty touchy-feely, this work of leadership, you know?
Well, I mean, I think that that's the distinction that most people don't understand, is that leadership is touchy-feely. Leadership is soft skills. Management isn't. That's different.
Right. That's right.
Leadership is. In the work that I've been doing with my clients, especially since the pandemic started, initially I reached out to all my leadership people and said, "You need me now more than ever." And they're like, "Well, we don't have people." You need me more than ever, because your soft skills have got to go up through the roof now, not down, up. And they're like, "Really?" And they're like, "Yeah," because, I just did an interview at a local radio station talking about exactly that, about grief, and about how, you don't think as a leader you have to deal with grief. Well, you do if you have to lay off 100 people. And that's your own survivor's guilt. That's the grief of having to let go of some people you might care about, and the grief of change. Oh, you don't get to go to the office. The grief of, I don't get to decompress for half an hour in my drive home. People are like, "Oh, it's so great, I don't have to drive." Yeah, let's wait and see, because there's no decompression from the bedroom to the living room where the kids are screaming. There's no decompression. And so how are you going to decompress? And people are like, "Oh my God, I never thought about that." Yeah. So it's a very fast changing situation we've got into right now. Now, I know that, you and I both very aware that people don't leave jobs. They, generally speaking, leave bosses. We know that. And there's all that work we talked about right at the beginning around creating a safe space. But we also need to reduce toxicity and all the rest of it. You outlined 7 things people need from work. I'd love to talk about those, because I think it's going to give us a sort of a grounding place for people to go to, because these are, if you're going to lead in any way, shape, or form, you've got to have them. So let's just walk through them if we can, and maybe we can come back into a couple of them for a bit more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think since you and I talked last, I've had this really interesting bit of insight and awareness. And I think, the COVID pandemic has, I think, only illuminated even more of my conviction about this. And that is that our needs of the workplace are very connected to our basic human needs just to get by in the world. And many people know best, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and some of the needs that my co-author for book 1, and then continuing in my research on my own, have identified are very aligned with Maslow's work. But there's also some pieces that I and other researchers are debunking of Maslow's work that maybe are not necessarily don't exist on his hierarchy of needs, but exist in a different way. And I think because of our 24/7 work environment, especially for professional level positions, our identities, we're spending more time at work than we are really anywhere else, which I think results in this sort of collision of our basic human needs with our human needs from work. So here are the 7 things that our research points to. The first one, and these are not in any particular order except for the first one. The first one we just referred to as to meet your basic requirements for life. And that's what, Maslow had that really at the bottom of his hierarchy around food, shelter, safety, security, fresh water. This in relationship to our employer is about, do I have enough cash and non-cash compensation in a capitalist environment to meet my basic needs and take care of my family, whatever that means to me. And as long as 2 conditions exist, that one actually doesn't hold the first spot, but it does if these 2 conditions don't exist. And they are, 1, that we're paid fairly. We call it felt fair pay, right? We believe that we're being paid on the market well enough compared to others like us. The second is that we can meet our basic needs on that job for food, shelter, safety, security. So if I'm at an entry-level job here in the US, for example, I'm making $12 or $13 an hour. If I have a family, or even if I live alone, I may not be able to provide my basic needs, which means that one stays in the number 1 spot until I can. But once I can, it drops to be one of the least primary for incoming generations, which I think is really fascinating because it's a shift even in my lifetime. So the second one, and this again, the rest of these aren't really in any particular order because they're temporally relative based on our stage of life. But one of our needs of work is to be able to contribute. In particular, contributing to something that matters to someone, doing something that someone notices, it matters. I can remember a first job that I had early on. I was working as a janitor at a acute care hospital, and I got trained and listened with one ear how to use the chemicals, wipe the floors, whatever. I had moved to that town to be near my boyfriend. I was in college, but about 3 weeks into my job, a woman on my watch, I had cleaned her room. She had come in for gallbladder surgery and she died. And my boss, his name was Pedro. I remember him to this day. He asked it to meet us, me and another janitor from the floor, and said, "Hey, I wanted you to know Mrs. So-and-so died, and she had come in for gallbladder surgery, but she concocted an infection while she was here. And so I want to review with you how we use these chemicals and in what order we clean the rooms to make sure that no one comes into the hospital and gets an infection on our watch." And whammo, like at that moment, this kind of mundane entry-level job for me in the summer became really important, deeply meaningful. And I knew then, what I'm doing does make a difference to whether someone loses their mother, sister, daughter, or friend over a routine procedure. And, all these years later, that story still sticks with me because it helped me really get like, I'm contributing something. Yes. So it's not about only having your organization have, let's say, a social or environmentally strong mission. It's more importantly about, do I feel like what I do matters?
Yeah, it's subjective meaning.
Totally.
One of the things you'll hear me say even at the end of the show, which is the single unifying difference between mediocrity and greatness is a single monolithic meaning, and that feeling that you're part of something that matters. Yeah. As you said, I'm cleaning rooms. Who cares? I'm using chemicals. Who cares? Oh, someone might die if I don't do it right, or I can keep people alive. It's that old story of the bricklayer building bricks, and then walk further down the road. What are you doing? Building a wall. Further down, what are you doing? I'm building a cathedral. Further down, what are you doing? I'm saluting God. Oh, still doing bricks, but from a different place.
Well, totally.
Single unified meaning.
Yes. And I think as employers, we sometimes lose sight of that. One of my favorite podcasts is Shekhar Vedante, Hidden Brain. And he has one called Bullshit Jobs. And he goes and interviews these people about jobs where no one can tell them why they're doing them. And it's really demoralizing, to not know, why should I be filing those things in that order? Why does that make a difference? So to contribute is huge. The third one is about being seen and known. And this is around reducing anonymity, having someone know, not necessarily the deep, dark details of our life, but our personal story a little bit, to recognize our name. It matters so much. It feels really good. My daughter, who's a young adult, she's 19. When she was younger, maybe 16, she got her first job, and she was a dishwasher at a local restaurant here in my town. And I noticed this kid who was having trouble in high school, like getting to class on time. And, she was dealing with anxiety, as a lot of children are, young kids today. And, but she got to work every day on time that whole summer. And I asked her one day, I said, tell me about this. Like, you're doing such a good job getting to work on time, and you seem to really love it. And she said, Mom, the thing is, they're expecting me. And I was like, yeah, that's being seen. They knew her name. They needed her to come at that time. It matters to us. After that, for the fourth item, we have connection, the need for human connection. And this is the one that I think we've debunked a little bit from Maslow's hierarchy, because he had the need for human connection kind of midway up his pyramid, as he called it, our love and belonging needs. But Brene Brown and Daniel Goleman and others have really moved the need for human connection right down to the base. It is as important to us as food, water, shelter, safety, and security. And we bring that need, because of how much time we spend at work, we bring that need right to work. And Vivek Murthy, who's our former Surgeon General here in the US, declared I think it was in 2015, that loneliness here in the US is an epidemic. And men suffer disproportionately from it. We have in the UK in 2018, they appointed a new Minister of Parliament who whose job is to be the minister of loneliness, and their single focus is to reduce isolation in our rural areas. So we have this underpinning of this drive to connect with other human beings as social needs, and we bring it to work. We don't wear a sign on our chest that says we need it, but we might as well.
But that's, I want to address that one for a little minute, just because I think that I've spoken so much about this, and I think it's so vitally important. We know the latest research into addiction has nothing to do with all the crap we were fed about the war on drugs. And the truth of the matter is it's about connection and having a community. And what we also know side by side with that is millennials want to work in an environment where they feel they have friends at work, because millennials are brilliant in that they stopped this bullshit that the rest of us did, which was called work-life balance. They understand it's nonsense. It doesn't exist. So you got to have work-life blend. And that means that your friends are at work, and that stops them from being lonely and allows them to have those things. So connection it saves us from addiction. It allows us to communicate better. And what we know is that the production level of people who have a best friend at work, also the research shows, goes up. I want to just pause for a moment there, because that one's an important one. And here's why. Because since the pandemic, people have gone remote. Companies said, well, we can't go remote. And then they discovered, oh, apparently you can turn an ocean liner on a dime, and we've got to do it or else we're going to go out of business. And they had 14 days, 21 at the most, to turn their companies around and go remote. Many companies did. I believe that more than 30% of the workforce will not return to standard workplaces. The challenge with that is, okay, you're at home, you have a family. Now you don't get the downtime that we talked about earlier, but there's a lot of people who live alone and their community is at work. What do you see as the future of that piece?
Yeah, I think it's a real issue, to be honest. I mean, I'm seeing rising levels of anxiety and despondency from workers everywhere. I can't even tell you, Dov, how many phone calls I'm on, Zoom calls where the chat's open and someone sends me a message, what would you say to someone like me? I'm worried about my mental health. I haven't seen another human in 2 months. I think it's a real challenge. It's interesting to me because, you've heard the expression Zoom fatigue. People getting Zoom fatigue. I have my own theory. Now, I'm not a brain researcher, but I think that part of why we're getting Zoom fatigue is that we're trying to get that emotional connection, that pheromonally based limbic brain response that says, like, I get you. So we're efforting on these calls to connect with each other. There are researchers, and I know this from some of my TED experiences. I heard a brilliant talk by Alex Generous, who herself is on the autism spectrum. And she talks about some research. She's a PhD candidate that they're doing to create pheromone sensors through technology that will allow, it's particularly used for people on the Asperger's spectrum. So because they have trouble sometimes translating the data coming in pheromonally to the actual emotion. And I've been thinking, gosh, that'll be great technology for virtual workers, because it will help us to feel each other in addition to seeing each other. So I think that companies are going to have to find, I'm thinking of them as sort of anchors or islands in the storm of virtual connection that does create some actual face-to-face connection, and some communities that both are enlivened through a variety of digital experiences, but also some occasional in-person experiences. I think it ups the primacy, the importance of having that occasionally. We had this weekend, a couple of family members were down from Washington and visited. We had a socially distant dinner, and we all commented about how it just was so wonderful after 3 months of not having dinner with friends to be in the same proximity. And I don't know that we're ever going to be able to do without that completely. But I think we can work around it a little bit creatively, and then kind of just honoring and acknowledging people need to have ways to connect at work.
Yeah, it's very interesting for me, the research around it, what's happening, what I'm seeing. And at the same time, when I interview millennials, that I have 26 people on a millennial team that work with me. And I was talking to the person who runs that team, and she said, we didn't know it was called quarantine lifestyle, but we live that lifestyle. And I go, what do you mean? She goes, She goes, I only people I ever meet are through my computer. I meet everybody. She's just 30, runs a international business. And she says, I have my close friends who are in my geographic proximity, but the rest of them, most of my friends, she goes, some of my closest friends I've never physically met. And I'm like, wow. So that makes me,
They're doing it. Yeah.
it makes me question my presumption, my own assumptions about connection.
Yeah.
Because for her, it doesn't seem to be missing through this. So do we miss connection in the form that it's in because we've only known it in the form that it's in? And if we move down the line 2 generations, not one, so not even Gen Z, but the generation that comes after that, and say, do they meet in person at all?
Yeah.
I don't know. I know that I'm seeing the impact of it on baby boomers, certainly on Gen Xers, absolutely, but maybe less on millennials and less still on Gen Z. So it'll be Gen Z. It'll be very interesting.
It will be very
interesting
yeah.
flex point.
It will be. I agree. And one of the things I'm noticing, and you've probably seen this too, is that a lot of it does have to do with how we connect. My team's a millennial team too. And we're typically a remote team. There's one person in my town, but the rest of us are remote. And I noticed that they have a different way of connecting electronically. It's more frequent. It's in smaller bursts. And they're more comfortable spending time just with, I would call it social connecting questions, asking questions about personal life, and having, like you said, sort of more of a blend between home and personal. And they really get energy from that. And so I think some of it is also about how we do it. Are we asking those ambiguous personal questions that facilitate connection, instead of just zooming through our agenda and then off we go off the call? So I think there is a lot to learn from the generations that have grown up on these digital platforms. But I don't think the need is going away, right? It's just a matter of how we make it.
It's how it's met. That's what I'm saying about the presumptions of how it's met is what I think we're going to be confronted with over the next 10 years.
No, I think you're right. And here's another little side benefit while we're on COVID. My mom is in her late 80s and she's pretty tech savvy. Like, I have to give my mom a lot of credit. Like, she uses her iPhone and she texts and stuff, but she's also learned how to use Zoom on COVID. And she talks to my sister who lives in New England, 3,000 miles away. They talk every day in that format. And I am noticing the reduction in isolation for my mom as an older person just through that technology. And I see mental health benefits there. So I think that that's an interesting reverse uptick of leveraging, during COVID. So we agree that one's super important. So the other couple that we have, one is our human need to learn. And this was on Maslow's hierarchy too, right? He had it as self-actualization, but it's really about just being better tomorrow than we were yesterday. We have a hunger to learn. The millennials get a bad rap because they're sometimes seen as, they want promotions before they're due. I think the need of millennials is more around, I want to grow. I want to learn. I want to be better than I was. And I think that it is a basic human need that we bring right into the workplace. And if as an employer, I don't have a plan, I'm not talking to my people about how they might grow here, they're not going to stay. They're just not going to stay with me because they want to grow. The last two are feeling supported. And this gets back to what we were talking earlier about brave versus safe in terms of the language. I originally titled this one to feel safe at work, going with this, this data we have that makes us know that we need psychological safety. But again, we can't guarantee it. So I think of it as feeling supported to take risks. And in particular, what we need as members of teams is we want to know someone has our back, right? And that our team or someone in that workplace is going to be there when we mess up, right? Because if we're taking risks, we're going to make mistakes. And so I think feeling supported means feeling supported for who we authentically are, knowing that we're not perfect, which means if we are stretching and growing, we may actually do it imperfectly sometimes, and we'll learn from that. And I think that support is really, really important. And then the last one, and this is another one that's changed a lot, I think, in my lifetime, is the need to make our lives work. When I entered the workforce as a young baby boomer, I don't think anybody in my family ever asked me, like, how's this job going to work in your life? They were just like, go work your ass off, do whatever.
Exactly.
And now my children who are in their 20s and 30s, they're saying, I'm not so sure. Like, can I still pursue my avocation? Can I be a musician? Can I travel? Can I work this work around my life? And I think that is growing. We see parents wanting to be caretakers in ways that are perhaps more attenuated to their children. We have people with hobbies that enliven them. And I think especially in the post-recession economy, and I'm sure now in the post-COVID economy, we've got a reprioritizing of the place that work fits in our lives. And so I think that need for our life to work too is just continuing to rise.
It's interesting when you look at the first thing you mentioned and the last thing you mentioned, because the first thing you mentioned is, do I have enough money to survive? And then, so if I don't, I got to get work. But if I'm going to get work, I've got to have a life, and so it's the top and bottom that is so vitally important, because, we used to go out and to get a job in order to have a life. And now what I love about millennials and even Gen Zs who are now, 20 years old, they're saying, I want to have a life. How does this fit with my life? And I know, because I work with baby boomers who are leaders who are like, what is wrong with the young people today? And I'm like, you're old. That's what's wrong with the young people today. You're old. But I think that's the beautiful thing is that they understand this.
Yeah.
They understand that it is not a work-life balance. It's a work-life blend that we've all got to sort of find a way to make work. Now, we're coming towards the end of the show, and I know that one of the subjects that is a hot subject for you, and I want to bring it in before we get a chance to finish, because it is, aside from, we know that we're recording this, it'll go out later, but I still think it's an important subject to bring up, which is diversity and inclusion. And I know it's an important subject for you and the work that you do, and it's the diversity and inclusion subject matter has obviously bubbled to the surface during the Black Lives Matter protests / riots, etc. But this is not just about, there's a very important part about it about African Americans, but there's also a very important part about it about people who are non-white. And then there's another group which are non-binary, and then there's another group which is women. Minor detail, women, right? They're not even outside of the binary thing. They might even just be white women, but that horrible lack of balance. When you see these pictures of the Senate, and we see pictures of the committees that are working on this or that, and the bloody group that is saying, we don't really care that much about women's health, because there's no women in there. And women on boards are now that, like in Iceland and places like that, which we're seeing a massive shift in the Scandinavian countries, where there's a mandatory to have women on the board. When you look at all that, do you think, and I want perspective here, do you see that this rise around Black Lives Matter and the consideration of race, do you think that's going to call for more, it's the ripple effect will cause for more women, or do you think the ripple effect will push that further out and make it really not that important right now?
No, thanks for asking that question that way. I really appreciate that. And to me, it's all connected. I agree. And to me, the thing that I keep coming back to is it relates to who's on the inside and who's on the outside.
Yes.
Right. And insider and outsider status drives all of this. And I think that I'm very optimistic. I'm trying to be optimistic when I'm not despondent about what the Black Lives Matter movement will do for us around really getting why it is that systems need to change so that they don't disproportionately benefit some and not all. Right now, it's centered around Black and white. And that's important. And it will center on all the other dimensions of difference. The reality is, and I see it, as I'm sure you do, Dov, is that organizations simply do better when they have not only diverse workforces at every level, but inclusive workforces where people feel like they belong and where it's equitable how I get power and status in that system.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as a white woman, a white middle class, heteronormative, able-bodied woman, I'm aware that feminism in the last 35, 45 years has benefited me and other white women like me more than it has benefited women of color, Black women, and other racial diversity. And so I think that we've got this huge percentage of the population, women of color, who are going to rise and share those seats. And I also think we're getting an upticking and finally maybe a blend of the power structures saying, the insider group saying, hey, could we imagine that we could even be better with more inclusion of all? And there's some powerful stuff coming out. You've probably seen it. There was a New York Times article in the paper yesterday about women political leaders leading their countries during COVID versus men. And some of the characteristics of insider culture, which is white male culture, which is adapted from white European culture, has, the tendency to be authoritarian, the tendency to be non-collaborative is not playing out well in some of the male leaders of the countries that have suffered the most during COVID. So, but some of the women leaders are doing much better. So I think we have to look at that. We have to look at it in the face. We have to say, what does this mean for us? And not just around men and women, but around the qualities of leadership that we know matter. And to say, all right, if you're a white male leader, what do you need to do to be more effective? And then also, how do we make sure that we've got equity at the table with women and all the other dimensions of difference? So we have to do it.
There was some research done about 8 years ago, and it tested women in leadership roles and how they did. And overall, they did better than the men across the board. But the one place they did far worse was their refusal to create a vision. And I thought that was really fascinating. So I dug into the research, which most people didn't. They just took the headline. And the reason, because they were asked, well, why won't you create a vision? And every woman leader said, because it isn't mine to create. Women were collaborative.
Yes.
They were being judged on a non-collaborative system that was the old white male system. And they were refusing to do that. And it's interesting to me that in the last even 5 years, the call for collaborative leadership is so much greater. And as that accelerates, my hopes for women in power go up, because we so freaking need empathy in the workplace, empathy in the world, not in the workplace, but in the world. Empathy, compassion, vulnerability, things that you and I talked about in our previous conversation that we've been talking about long before it became popular with Daniel Goleman or with even Brene Brown, who we both love. Anybody who is bringing that to the spotlight, it's important. And that means by virtue of that, we have to embrace collaboration, embraces diversity and inclusion, and there's no way around that. So, Mo, this has been a wonderful conversation. There was so much more I could have gotten into with you. However, I always I'm going to give you a chance in a moment to tell our audience more about you and where you came from, how people can reach out to you and find out more about you and all your resources. But before I do that, I always like to ask, can you share with us a single piece of practical advice, something that our listeners, our viewers can go away and say, okay, you can go do this today. Like, get off your butt, go do this now. What would it be in context of what it is you're sharing?
Be curious. Be curious, listen, be curious, ask people, how do you see it? why do you see it that way? Why does that matter to you? And really listen. Like, I think right now, especially, I think if we can be more curious, we will create better workplaces that are fit for human life. So that's my mantra right now for myself too.
That's
Be curious.
awesome. As you know, it's my sign off, and it's I believe I created another show out of it because I believe it's the only way to save the world.
Mm,
Love won't do it because everybody has a subjective understanding of that. Communication won't do it because we're terrible at it. But we
mm.
can be curious. We can all say, I don't understand. Help me understand that.
Which leads to empathy, right? Because then we can feel with, then we can feel with. And by the way, you were talking earlier, Michael Kimmel, who wrote Angry White Men, he has this wonderful thing he says in his TED Talk about men must benefit too from inclusion. Nothing will
Yes.
change until men benefit too. And I think what you're saying and what we're saying together around be curious is that when we really are in with each other with that curiosity, it uplifts us all, including white men, right? It's not about anybody having to suffer or have less. It's about we all get to be more connected, more vibrant, more successful in the ways that matter to us. So,
And that's an interesting full circle because where we started out was this thing around, with changes, the grief of the fear of loss. And I believe that one of the antidotes for the fear of loss is not that you're going to take away what people are losing, but to show people the value of what they're getting. Right. So it's not just I'm losing this, but okay, I have to deal with that grief, but what am I getting?
yeah.
And I think that a lot of people who look like me, white males, just see that I've got to give up a piece of my pie and I'm losing something, as opposed to what can I gain? What am I getting out of this? And that's a very, very important piece. So that was a great way to finish. Thank you. Mo, please tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you and all your wonderful resources.
Awesome. Thank you, Deb. So you can find me on all the social. I'm on Instagram as Moe Carrick. It's MOE. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. My website is moecarrick.com. We have a couple fun specials right now. We just launched our Love Your Job online class, which has a free toolkit. I know that a lot of people are out of work globally right now, and the toolkit offers just so many awesome resources to help you not jump from the frying pan to the fire, but really find a job that turns you on. And so I offer that to folks free. They can find it on the website on the toolkit page, and I'd love to hear what people think and to engage. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mo. It was a pleasure and honor having you here. Thank you for all that you shared. It was a blessing. I appreciate it. And for you, dear listener, remember you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode you've been listening to or any of our past episodes by going to either our Facebook or our LinkedIn groups and just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't fully understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or for your organization, simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for both individuals and for companies. We want to thank you for sharing this show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you could be more curious in the way that you interact with everyone, because there is a line between what you absolutely need just to survive and the life you want to live, and how do you bring those things together, because that's what we've been talking about on this show. We really appreciate it. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.